I'd like to welcome our members and our guests, Alan Blake, Scott Gilbert, Cindy Slater, Alan Smith, Buster Stewart, Dwayne Thompson, Bill Winters, and of course Mayor Davis and Chairman Cry. Appreciate y'all all being here. First thing on the agenda today, everybody should have an agenda in front of you. Be sure and when you talk, if you have any questions, anything, push that button that's in front of you to turn your mic on. The little button right there just turns red when you're live, and turn it on or off if you need to talk, please. First thing we need to do is approve the minutes from
Mr.
April.
Chairman, after reviewing the minutes, I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Mr. Blake with a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Smith. Moving right on, Lori include. I'm sorry.
We need to vote.
Yes. All in. Well, we won't do a roll call. We'll just anybody have opposed to it. Just nod your head. All approve. Say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Cindy. Lori's put in a packet there, review committee and enabling resolution, which hopefully y'all read. I don't see any reason to sit here and go over it and read it all again, but it kind of gives you an idea of why the audit committee formed, how it works, and all that. And if anybody did read it or have any questions about it, feel free to ask them now. If not, we'll move on pretty quickly. Yes, sir.
You're talking about when it came
Page
out,
5, yeah.
when it came out in late December, we went through it. The mayor probably is going to touch on some of the highlights, but Lori and I put together the fund balances because in the audit is the actual fund balance that we have to go by. Everything is a projection until the audit actually verifies that with a fund balance. So that came out in finance a couple months ago. If anybody wants that, so each fund balance will look pretty good. We recall on that. Other than that, in my 8 years, I guess this has been one of the best audits with respects to the health of Bradley County. So I was really glad to see that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Any other comments on this? Seeing none, we'll move right on in. I'm going to skip down to number 6 and turn it over to Mayor Davis for financial highlights, and we'll move on from there, and then we'll go back up and hit the findings and so forth, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad you changed that order because the agenda is written in the order that the state auditors do audits. And these other guys know anytime you hear an audit report, those audit findings are not the first thing. Usually, we were given an audit yesterday at the Development District, and I had to dig through it to even find where the findings were. So the important things, as I like to call them, I appreciate it. I'll hit some according to my perspective, and there may be some other things you want to talk about. The only thing is some of my things might mention things like it's on your agenda, statement of net position. But usually an audit, you start out page 10 with the phrase, the independent auditor concluded based upon the audit that there was a reasonable basis for rendering an unmodified opinion that Bradley County's financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30th are fairly presented in conformity with GAAP. Fairly presented, unmodified audit, clean audit. In other words, that's what you always want. That's one thing we do always have, but that's important and a lot of times gets overlooked. Go to the net position, and I'll try. I won't say a lot about it since it's on your agenda, but page 25 of your audit. One of the most important things in my perspective about any audit is the net position and the change in net position. The assets and deferred outflows of resources of Bradley County's primary government exceeded its liabilities and deferred inflows of resources at the close of the recent year by $55 million. That's important. Your net position, $55 million. And then if you look at page 28, it gives you a fairly important thing. In governments, I realize we're not in the business to make money, but a business would be looking at their profit and loss, and they're looking for that word profit. Page 28 is one place. Most things are in an audit 4 or 5 different times from 4 or 5 different perspectives. or points of view. But on page 28, you look at the net position of the current year that we're talking about and the year before, 55 million this year, it was 42 million last year, so that tells you your net position increased by $13 million, which is sort of like a profit in the private sector. So that's a good thing. We're not in the business to make money, but as I told somebody the other day, you want to stay on the black side of the equation, so we're definitely there. Page 27, something I get asked about a lot is debt, and down toward the bottom of page 27, as June 30th, 22, Bradley County's outstanding debt, $63 million for capital purposes of education, 46 for county schools, 16 million for city schools. That's important. The statement above it's important. Only you, the county commission, can approve debt. One of the elections I went through, I had to respond to my opponent constantly saying we had too much debt. She was running against me, and yet I don't have the authority to issue debt. So that's always an important thing. Page 34, assets. A lot of our budget, a lot of our money is spent increasing assets, but some of the bigger things they include in the audit, major capital assets during that fiscal year, purchase of 15 life pack monitors for the EMS, that was a big deal. Purchase of 18 power loaders for the monitors at EMS, 400,000. The other one was 500,000. Rechassis of 3 ambulances, 256,000. Body scanners for the sheriff's department, may have already forgotten, that was a big purchase. 5 vehicles that year for the sheriff's department, 78,000. Purchase of an interview room system at the sheriff's department, purchase of 2 water heaters at the sheriff's department, purchase of 1 Dodge quad cab for the drug fund, and the purchase of 250 for probations for 28,000. Those major purchases are something that continue to show on our assets, of course. One thing I failed to mention, decrease in debt, page 35, because a lot of times people think we're only adding to our debt because it makes headline in the newspaper when you borrow money, and that increases our debt. But at the end of the current fiscal year, total bonds, $74 million, and our debt did decrease by $6.6 million this year, which it always does approximately that amount unless you do additional borrowing. One of the things that's going to start looking a little different in the future is GASB has made us start listing leases as debt. And I agree that they're debt to an extent, but a 2-year copy machine lease isn't a long-term capital debt, but it will be reported as that. So that's going to get our debt kind of skewed. There's lots and lots of leases throughout Bradley County, as you know, and most of them are copier leases. And all the copier leases that I sign always say subject to county commission funding, which means they're only for 1 year. Legally, we can't commit to anything more than 1 year. It may be a 3-year lease, but it'll have a phrase in there that says subject to the county commission funding. And if that's not there, I don't sign it. And if that's not there, it has to come to you all to approve. You see what I'm saying? And you very rarely see copy machine leases because that phrase is always in there. And if you run across a department head or elected official, I got a 3-year copier. Yes, but that phrase is in there, so we're able to count it as a 1-year lease because it may go away next year. But now GASB's forcing all that to be reported in the capital debt, which is going to skew it in time. That kind of bothers me, but there's nothing you can do about it. Hopefully Mylon and others will talk about it more, but this is the first time I've been able to say no findings for us, for the finance department. You see Mike Smith's picture in the paper, you'll see Gayla Miller's picture, these different elected officials, because they had no findings for their department. Well, our office deals with all departments, and there's 99% of the time going to always be something there. And we call them opportunities for improvement, as you've heard me say year after year. But this year we didn't have anything, and that is just unreal. So I'll probably never be able to say that again after this year, but no findings whatsoever, other than the 3 or 4 that you'll be talking about later, and they had nothing to do with us. But you got to understand the finances, whether it's Gala's or the sheriff's or whoever's, their purchases go through us, their accounts payable goes through us, their payroll goes through us. So they may have their picture in the paper with no findings, but we may be listed as 3 opportunities for improvement or findings, and that's just almost always going to be there. But having said that, no finding whatsoever this year, and so that is really wonderful. With state auditors, that's really wonderful if they're watching. I love you guys, but that is wonderful to have no findings when you have state auditors. Uh, they have one goal, and that's to have opportunities for improvement. And as long as you treat them like opportunities for improvement, which we do, then it's a good thing because they're pointing things out you could do better. But again, to the media, they look for the word findings, and the state uses the word findings, and so it makes a negative thing oftentimes. But no findings whatsoever, so I'll say that again if you want me to. But thank you, and I'll shut up with that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Unless someone has a question.
Mr. Thompson, you have a question?
I've got just one quick question, because this is not my wheelhouse. Are there constraints on how the 55 million is used is one question. And second question is there a ceiling on that, or is it, I mean, obviously in a company, you want as much net profit as possible, but in a
But the
government.
55 million isn't the profit. The increase from year to year is the profit, so 13 million.
Right.
You won't see that number anywhere. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's kind of misleading. It's when they take the money you've spent and subtract it from the assets, then if you're spending most of it on assetable items, which we do, whether it be buildings or cars or things like that, then your assets are growing, and the difference in the two becomes your net position in government.
Sure, yeah, it's more of a change in cash position or fund balances than it is real net profit.
And it's
So-
not real cash that's somewhere
No, of course,
budgeted.
of
so,
course.
yeah.
No, it could be assets. But are there any limits on that they recommend?
I don't think so. no.
I wouldn't think so either. I was just curious. But
Now, see, I haven't looked at the nursing home section this time, but sometimes you take a facility that is aging and you don't have that net position situation. You
Right.
see what I'm saying?
Sure.
Because they're not investing in new wings and new additions like we're always building schools. So when we build a school, it increases our assets. It's reported in the school section, but it's mainly things like that when your assets outweigh
sure.
what you're doing.
And I just want to say, I've served on this committee for a good number of years, and I was pleased with having read through this, and it looks like you guys are doing a terrific job. So I think, kudos to you, and your staff is in order.
Thank you. I want to add one thing to that. I think I've already told most of you. They also give you an exit interview where they have a list of things to look at. Well, that list, they made sure it was a mile long this year, setting us up so that I can't say what I just said about 10 times next year. So be prepared. But again, we'll treat it as opportunities for improvement as long as you understand that. And the media's gotten a lot better. When audits used to come out, they would come out and go straight to the media, and the first page of the media would see is findings. They never read that 300-page document. They read the findings, and there was their story. Now they give us a heads up on the audit. Hey, it's coming out tomorrow, and then it goes to everyone. It's still, and it's not page 1 of the audit anymore either, but of course it's got a thing that'll take you to the right page. But things have gotten a lot better over the years, but it is misleading because there's always going to be rooms for improvement. We understand that, but that doesn't mean anything's being done wrong. Even the ones you have this time, most of them you can go through, and they're just, most years I'll get one, what's that called, where you don't have enough employees to do the separation of duties? That's in somebody's every year. We've been able to assign I've got a secretary that's not even in the finance department, but she is the person that runs the signature machine because we don't have enough employees to have a separation of duties. So on, the next door office and we've done things like that and kind of got away from it, but some of them don't have that option either. But that's the kind of thing you can always stick in there. But no, I appreciate it. Thank you. And it's come a long way, but just understand next year we'll be talking about findings. I have no doubt, opportunities for improvement anyway. Appreciate it.
Thank you there, Dwayne. Any other comments referencing the mayor? Mr. Blake, you have anything?
Now, I will speak to the nursing home. We met last night, and their audit is included in here, but the nursing home continues to do well. COVID affected them probably more than anybody. I mean, really, they had to go through with obviously the testing 2 or 3 times a week, the employees and all their residents and stuff like that. And then, they basically had to become, shut down and stuff like that. But this is, I believe, is like the first year when Oliver, the director over there, the census is up. I think, what was it, 106, something like that. Just continue to go on. Their ratings are going up so that they can, you have to have a certain rating for health insurances to pay for someone to stay there. The veterans can stay there now and stuff like that. So pre-COVID for them has been a lot longer than for the rest of us, but they're now coming out of it and doing very well. And the building needs a little tenant love and care. We talked about that last night. But yeah, the audit for the nursing home is standing tall. So that piece of it doing really well. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. If I apologize that the mayor was referring to numbers on pages that we didn't feel like running all 300 and something pages for y'all to sit here and try to thumb through real quick. Hopefully you had it like Dwayne on your tablet or something so you could went along with him, but that's fine. Statement of next position, net position is on 15, 16 and 17. I think the mayor covered some of that already. So any questions or comments referencing that particular 16 or 17? Any questions about that net position? Seeing none. We'll findings, audit findings, see page 15. If you look at page 15, the office of Clerk and Master had 4 findings, and if I'm not mistaken, I think those are pretty much the same findings we find every year for them, isn't it, Mayor?
You're right. I will say this: the major one that they need to watch more is the first one.
Yeah.
Excess fees are supposed to be turned over to us quarterly. They do turn them over, but according to this audit, weren't doing it timely or quarterly like they're supposed to. However, in their defense, I can remember years where that office didn't turn them over, period. And it's funny, they never had findings back then. But they do turn them over now. I mean, in other words, they have excess fees, but according to the audit, they weren't doing it timely. And
Just to add that, chatting with her, since then, she has additional personnel to handle some of this as well, right, Mayor? We approved so she increased her head count to start working on some of the things that just pure volume upstairs of what she has to do with investments and stuff like that. So hopefully the new person, full-time person, will help with just the sheer volume of transactions that she has to do upstairs.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Any other comments referencing the findings on office of the Clerk and Master? The other one was on the Sheriff's Office. The office did not review a list of valid transactions and reprinted checks. Mayor, you may enlighten us a little on that also, if you could, or Mr. Blake, you could.
I talked to Cassandra about that, and basically, and real quick, what happens if someone gets into their custody, obviously their wallet or their cash or whatever has to be categorized, has to be accounted for. They put it in their lockbox or whatever, and they have to report that at a certain time. They just need to get to where they get those due dates is what we're talking about. Nothing's, the money's still there and all that kind of stuff. It's just that they have to report that, I believe, monthly, and she was reporting it quarterly. So now she's going to report it monthly. So that's what that's all about.
Well, that's the only findings we had. kudos, I guess, to mayor and all the different department heads. Seems like everybody's doing a good job, like Dwayne was saying. So we'll move right on into committee determinations. A is, do the finance statement appear to be fairly presented and free of material misstatements, or if not, what are the reasons for this? Does anybody have any comments on that or anything? I don't think we need to vote on anything like that, but if you have a comment, if you're not agreeable with it, let us know so we can put it in our minutes as such. Item B, if audit findings are repeat findings, what's the determination of the committee if management appears to lack the desired ability to correct this situation? Listen to Mr. Blake, I think that finding has already pretty much hopefully been corrected as far as the clerk's office up the stairs. Any comments or questions referencing that part of the? Yes, sir, Mr. Winters.
When the auditors make this determination, particularly on that quarterly's been moved to monthly, they're making the movement. Did they not put that in consideration into this audit, that it's changed from quarterly to monthly, and it just wasn't?
They do,
available
from what I understand, they do, and I guess adhering to their rules of GASB or whatever terminology, they feel that they have to in order for the integrity of their report. But yeah, that is communicated.
If I could,
Corrective action
is reported as well. A lot of times you need to look at the corrective action plan because they do require a plan of correction, and a lot of times that correction plan will say already corrected as of this date. They still have to do it, even though they know it's been corrected, but they include that plan of action telling that it's been corrected.
So there doesn't appear to be a lack of desire or ability to correct these issues. So I think what we're saying here is that there is no lack of desire or ability to not correct these issues.
And the A, you're saying that the statements do appear to be fairly presented, blah, blah, blah. That, according to the auditors, say.
Then, of course, C here, based on audit committee's assessment, the independent auditors of the county appear to be independent of county management. The independent audit was performed in compliance with Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, and the auditors were professionally competent. I guess, Mayor, you could answer that better than any of us.
They're definitely independent of management, that is for sure. You know, the aggravating thing to the departments, just to help you understand, and I don't mean this negative, it's like everybody else. Every year it's a new, fresh, green auditor just about shows up. And the bad thing about that with auditors, and my daughter used to be one, when you show up that first year, you're going to look at things that may not have been looked at. This year, another reason great that not have a finding. This auditor asked me questions I hadn't been asking in 20-something years. But she was new, nothing wrong with her questions. Just as I said, ma'am, I don't know. I've not been asked that one before. You know what I'm saying? Well, and then in 2 or 3 years, it'll be another one. And so that, I guess, keeps you awake and on your feet, but it changes. So you're going to have things from time to time for that reason, too. I want to point out one other thing that's important. I don't want to emphasize it because we got more years to come. But this is the first year of ARP money. And they do say in there that they checked all federal grants, blah, 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 and there were no issues. So that's something we feared. You know, we have to do all that reporting to the federal government, but auditors have taken it on as one of the things that they're checking on, too, to make sure we spend it right. Well, that's my argument. That's between us and the federal government, whether we spend it right, because it came from them. But the state has taken on that role. So this is the first audit, you know, the year where we did the money, where we gave employees the money, the $10,000 things, all of that was in this audit. So that's another thing. They've gotten past all that without any issues. Of course, now we're in another big year of it, and we'll probably have another year or two of it. But we always have federal grants, but the ARP money has always been kind of scary to me, knowing that they're taking on that role. But everything's all right in this one, so that's a good thing.
Mayor, if you don't mind, I think some of our civilians here that don't listen to ARP money all the time might want to have just a quick update on what is ARP money.
Well, you've probably heard about it. It's I call it the Biden money that miraculously showed up in our bank account one day, $21 million in our case. And we put together a plan. We put together a plan of how we wanted to spend the $21 million, and we've got 6 buckets set aside with amounts in each one. We're working through those. Some of them have been totally committed. The water bucket, I think, is the only one that's not been totally committed, and we'll get it either done or moved to another bucket soon. But that is a separate fund in our budget. You know, you got the general fund, you've got the capital projects, you got all these funds. Well, now there's a fund called ARP funds, and that will show how we're spending it. And then quarterly, we have to do a very detailed report to the feds. Development District helps us with it, but anyway, we have to report that we're spending it properly. And the book to how to spend it properly is about the size of this thing. So it's very concerning, but that's why I mean it's really a big deal that so far we've not had any problem with it. And again, it's between us and them. They sent it directly to us. Now, smaller communities, it went to the state and then to the community. With us, it came straight to us. So the agreement is if we don't spend it wisely, we got to pay it back. Well, that's scary in itself. But we report to them, and hopefully they tell us on a quarterly basis, hey, you're doing fine. At least we've not had any issues so far. But then at audit time, the state's looking at the budget we create. And there have been this, well, you shouldn't have spent it this way or that way. Well, you know, it's not between us and them. It's between us and the feds. And that's where there could be some potential problems down the road. I don't think in our case, because we're not doing it there's a lot of gray areas you could spend the money on, and I've tried to stay away from the gray areas as much as possible because I know the state will question those gray areas. So we've stayed in what's as close to black and white as possible, even though with feds, nothing's black and white. But that's what we're talking about, is that $21 million, which is set up budget-wise as a separate fund. And as we go through it, you can track it in the audits and the budgets of how it was spent. Which will be something good to look back on, and then it'll be gone away in a couple of years, and that fund will be gone. It's been good to have, but I'll also be glad when it's gone too. But they keep telling us, you know, make sure you spend it wisely because we're going to be checking it. And so to get through an audit and not have any issues on that, I'd say in some smaller communities they possibly are because for whatever reason. But again, we've set it up. One bucket's at our discretion, and anytime these guys want to spend something that it might be okay, but I'm not sure, then I try to get it put in the bucket of discretion. And the feds won't question it in the bucket of discretion. That don't mean the state won't. And so that's we're playing that by ear because this is the first one, and we don't really know what to expect there. But so far, it's been good. Yeah, if you have any questions about any of that, and we're spending it on things like broadband, water, septic repairs, minimal housing, and things like that for the community, not just outside the city, but Bradley County as a whole. So it's being spent wisely, I think. It's being invested in the community is what I always say. And it's I'm really proud of how we're doing ARP. I really am. And it's going well, although it's a headache too because of all the reporting.
You might mention who we've hired to handle the paperwork on that.
The development district is the admin on a lot of it. And then this other organization, Resource Conservation Development, is doing the septic repairs. But all of the paperwork and the budgeting and the amendments and all of that, all the resolutions and I just signed 2 contracts today that result in what you all approve, we're still doing it. And I'm not complaining trying to grow a department like some people do, like a lot of people do, but we're still at the two-person department. And so this is a totally another layer. The development district helps out. They, with the housing thing especially, they worked with the organizations to make sure they were spending it wisely. Because we're giving the money out, and it's our neck on the line if it's not spent wisely. But yet we're not the ones spending it a lot of times. We may be giving it to city fields. City fields don't spend it wisely. They don't get city fields; they get us. That makes sense. So development districts working with them as they get their money to make sure that everything's done properly. And that's a feel-good thing, and it's not costing us a whole lot of money so far.
Mr. Blake?
Yeah, on that, I distinctly remember the day, Mumpower came and I asked him that very question about the nonprofits, that if they didn't spend it correctly, who was on the hook, and he didn't mix any words that day. It was on us, so I think that was a good choice. But I think it's worth mentioning also on the whole concept of it, the city of Cleveland received art money as well. They have their own bucket of money, as well as the city of Charleston. Obviously, it's proportional to the population and that kind of stuff. Working with the feds, for me, I'll just say, was a new experience. When they first came out with it, we had a big conference call and everything, and they said the first guidelines. Then they came out with the intern guidelines. And then they said, well, soon you'll have the final guidelines. And then they amended the final guidelines. So all along, they were changing and stuff like that. But we took the conservative approach with the mayor's help and everything, of making sure that there was no way ever we were going to have to write a check back to the Treasury Department in Washington. We want to spend every penny correctly. I think we have. But come next September of 24, we basically have to have everything appropriated. So the Finance Committee and the Commission, I think, will look at the next year and a half, make sure we get all spent, but never ever have any opportunity or take any risk that we ever have to write a check back to. Because in that same meeting, they also said you can't use the money we gave you to pay your fine. Can't. So I was like, well. So anyway, on that, working with the feds was a new experience for me, I can tell you.
Any other comments? We're down to number 8, our scheduled meeting with department heads. With no more findings than we have, I think we've already resolved probably the findings that we did have, so I don't really see any need to bring any department heads unless the audit committee would like to, which is up to y'all, but I don't see any reason anybody. If not, any other comments, questions? Guess we're adjourned.